Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next segment in the Picking Greens and Being Green series of webinars that we're having as part of the Chisholm Legacy Project. I'm so happy you're able to join us. Today, we have a special treat for you. We are actually engaging or listening to two of our younger environmental justice advocates and activists, Laura Carter, who is actually one of the few people that I've met who was born in DC, and Carrie Fulton, who is very active in DC. And so we'd like to listen to what both of them have to share with us about the lessons learned around champagne taste and beer money. And this hopefully will generate for you some memories. I've still been thinking about some of the things I learned. I just took some, I had a roasted chicken, and I took the carcass, and I'm making chicken broth for use in cooking. So, you know, it's all about conservation and reuse and things of that nature. So enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next segment of Picking Greens and Being Green, Black Mamas on Culture, Conservation, and Community series. This segment focuses on champagne taste and beer money. And I'm so excited to bring you this new episode with two awesome young women who will be sharing their fresh perspectives on the lessons they learned or the lessons that they utilize in life around conservation and I guess living within your means, whether it's money, water, electricity, or living large in general. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Laura Carter and Carrie Fulton, environmental activists, educators, gosh, so much. They're very active in the EJ arena. They're known by those who work in this space, who've been working in this space for years, and they are the future of environmental justice, and we're excited about that. So ladies, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy you're able to join us today. So
thank you for having us.
Yeah, hey, I am so excited because, you know, I think it's important to hear voices, all the voices, and I think you're going to bring a different perspective because you're probably I think the lessons are probably fresher for you than they are for a lot of us. And also you probably utilize them differently. I think because we're talking about a different age group, let's be honest. You know, the three of us are in the same age group. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, you're in a, you know, a younger age group. So I just am excited to hear what you guys are going to share with us. So I'm going to address the first question to both of you. Just a general question. What is it about this project that really sort of captured your interest and compelled you to participate? And anyone can go. I won't do the name calling thing. We're not in school. Okay, Alora.
I think the work of the Chisholm Legacy is very influential as well as needed in the work that we're doing around environment. Sadly, the environmental space is portrayed as a very white space and a very male-dominated space. And I think that this project does just the opposite of that. It highlights not only women, but it highlights women of color. And so the opportunities for us to continue to uplift each other, uplift our stories, uplift our work, and really just be an example for other women who can say, you know, I've always wanted to do this, but I've always had a white boss, or I've always had a male boss. So I wasn't sure if I had a place in the movement, because we know that climate change, environmental justice, it affects women and children the first and the worst. And so this project is an opportunity to share the knowledge that many women of color have given me through my journey, as well as, you know, break those stereotypes of, you know, the environmentalist is the white male with a backpack who hugs trees, or, you know, other stereotypes, versus that an environmentalist can be anyone of any color, shape, size, anything, but long as you have a commitment to preserving not only our natural planet, but the people who live on the planet and improve their lifestyle. So I think this project gives that opportunity in different ways, with just different themes and topics, but there's ways for any woman anywhere to get involved and learn something and be a part of it.
Wow, thank you, Laura. And I just want to say, my cousin calls me a tree hugger. So, that's the term for all of us environmentalists. I don't know why, but I like trees. So Carrie, share your perspective.
Yeah, I like trees too. Sometimes I dap them up, sometimes I talk to them, ask them how they doing. Sometimes you got to talk to the trees, because the trees are giving us life, and in many ways we're giving them life, because if you've ever talked to your plants, they always say it's good because you're giving them oxygen. So we grow together. I'm really excited about this project because of the legacy that comes with so much generational understanding of what environmentalism is. I've had the opportunity to work under a lot of really amazing women and a lot of people in general, community members, scholars who are deep in the trenches and who do this work, not just from a place of academic prowess, but also from a place of understanding that this is their lived experience and their communities that they come from. And oftentimes, even for my own understanding, I didn't look at my experiences as environmental justice experiences until I started getting in depth into this work, until I knew the terms, until I could define how my life was growing up. So the idea and the opportunity to talk about our environment in the way that we see it and how we've defined it, how our communities, the people around us, we're talking about the women in our lives, which is great. And I also thought about some of the other male elders and the things that they've brought in. So that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. But I really just appreciated the thought activity of looking back and even going through some of those pictures and being like, wow. And, there's definitely more that I could have shared, but I also wanted to be respectful to some of the folk that are still alive and not put them on Front Street about how we were saving money and coins back in the day. But, we'll do what we can.
Thank you. And we appreciate you sharing that. And that is a great segue to my first question, but for both of you. What do you think about when you hear the term champagne taste and beer money? And I think we'll start with you this time, Carrie.
Michelob Light.
Okay, Michelob Light. That's
the beers. I think about that. I think about how we've been able to make the most out of what we have. So whether that is thinking about how we flavor even the scraps that we're given and turn it into a gourmet meal, or how we're able to go into a thrift store. One thing I do appreciate is my mama and my folk teaching me how to go into a thrift store and know quality, and know how to look at fabrics and know how to say, this is something that's a piece that will last a long time versus fast fashion that you're going to buy and it's going to break on you immediately. So I really appreciate that. And I think a lot about that when we say champagne tastes with beer money, is that we can do what we can to make that beer the finest beer you've ever tasted in your life. So it's all about how we present. And also, sometimes champagne is not that tasty anyway.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Laura.
I think about it as kind of the opposite way. I'm in my early 30s, and all of us have friends and relatives who are living these wonderful lives on social media and other places, and they don't have two nickels to rub together. If there's an emergency, they can't handle it. And so when I think about champagne taste and beer money, I often think about, I do have friends who they dress well. They're always on trips somewhere. I've never seen them without eyelashes, fresh nails, fresh toes. You know, they laugh, oh, you shop at TJ Maxx, they laugh at you about that because they always look good. But I also have to remember that, yeah, I may not have all those things, but I do own my own home. I do have a savings account. So if I need a rainy day fund, or mad money, as my mother would say, you know, and I've always appreciated the lessons learned from older people. My grandmother, she was a woman who could dress, would always make sure she looked good no matter what. But we always had, you know, we may not have had millions in the bank, but we had backup money if something broke in the house and we needed to get it fixed. And I think that a lot of us, we're living that lifestyle in two different ways. The way I described first, of, you know, I'm living the high life, I look good, but I really can't afford to live that life. And then there are those of us who see the difference and say, you know what, I may not be going to Cancun every other weekend. And I have nice taste for things, but I also realize that I don't have the budget for that. And I have some money put aside, and I'll make it work with my TJ Maxx or my Ross clothes or my thrift store clothes, versus run into whatever new sale is at, you know, some designer that I can't afford, or a designer that really doesn't even support Black and brown people, to be honest with you. And so, you know, it can be thought of in two ways. And so I encourage people to try to be more on the thrifty side than the designer side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when Carrie talked about, first of all, you both are definitely on point. And when Carrie talked about the thrift store, man, you took me back, because I just remember my mom and the five of us, her children, going in there, and yeah, not just buying anything, but actually you could get quality clothes, and knowing that, you know, as a Lord, there's nothing wrong with going to a, you know, Goodwill or whatever thrift store, and because you're going to get the same, if you know what you're doing, you're going to get the same quality clothes. So that's important, and I appreciate, you know, you guys sharing that with us. But was there you know, when you in your lives, has there been a time when you were particularly challenged, like there was something you really wanted and you couldn't, you know, you had to make that decision about whether to get it or not, based on, you know, what we've learned, I guess what we were taught about conserving things and being, not necessarily, well, and being money conscious, right? Being aware of future needs and things like that. So are there any challenges that you can just, one thing that kind of stands out for you? And Dolores, we'll start with you.
I mean, I go through this all the time. I'm always getting updates from Coach for new handbags. I'm in too many shopping websites, little email groups. And I think really, you know, I'm one of 4 kids, so I always, for a time I got hand-me-downs for a little bit, but then when I got a lot bigger than my older sister, I got my own stuff sometimes. But even then, I have 2 younger sisters, they're twins. So my mom would just be like, when I have to buy new things for them, I have to buy it at the same time. So you will have to get whatever's left. My grandmother, she would spend, you know, good money for us to have lovely church clothes, quality clothes. But I'd say, can I have Jordans? And it was like, no, your feet grow too fast. You're going to get, you know, whatever shoes we get from whatever store. And so, you know, that always kind of was like, you know, I really wish I could, you know, have my own money to dress the way I want and buy what I want and not have to wear hand-me-downs or not have to be subjected to, like, you know, the off-brand shoes, because the twins had to get new stuff and, you know, the twins were the most important. But I guess really last year I was able to buy my own home, and to start the process, I really had to say, you cannot spend any money. Like, you cannot go shopping. You cannot get your hair done. You cannot get your nails done. And for a good, like, year, almost 2 years, it was, luckily the pandemic actually helped with that. It was very much, you know, people were, you know, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to brunch. And I had to just say, no, I can't do it. And at the time, you know, it was really hard because I was like, I have the money, I'm working, you know, I'm side hustling, I'm making money, but why can't I do what I want? And I definitely think that was a process of me just having to really struggle with, like, you know, it wouldn't kill me to spend $20 on this. It's a sale. It wouldn't kill me not to go to, even now, you know, I wouldn't kill me not to go to brunch with them. And then I want to do it. But, you know, I also have to think about as well, like, you know, it's $70, but that $70 could be well spent somewhere else. As well as, you know, especially growing up, like, you know, like we were talking about things we had to conserve, you know, our refrigerator broke when I was a kid, and I'm thinking we're gonna get a new refrigerator with an ice maker, and it was real cool. We got someone else's refrigerator from someone else's house when they bought a new refrigerator. And I was like, why can't we get a new refrigerator? Like, we always get stuff that somebody else doesn't want. That sucks. And you know, at the time, my sisters and I were like, oh, we could have got a new refrigerator. We always get the old stuff, but you know, that's what we could afford. We could afford someone's refrigerator that was still working, that was good to go, that held us over, and that, you know, really also, as I got older, I thought about, wow, we didn't put something else back into a landfill. We actually took something from someone else. My mom had a friend who could fix anything. He fixed it up and it worked just fine. I think those were just a few of the times where I was like, you know, it would have been nice to have something new or brand new and have what you want, but realizing that the sacrifice at the end was worth it, because yeah, we had an older refrigerator, but I'm sure my mother was able to pay other bills and buy other things because she didn't have to spend $500-600 in a refrigerator. You know, she only spent $200, and then the rest went to maybe getting me something new I didn't realize that she bought new for me, or maybe even saying, you know, this weekend we can actually go to the pool and hang out because I've got $20, $30, $100 extra dollars to go out to the pool to hang out for the day and get, you know, pizza afterwards or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Carrie.
So I definitely would agree on that around the hand-me-downs and the secondhand. A lot of times I've gotten into the point of somewhat embracing it a bit, in the sense of, if there is something that is, you know, you have to pick and choose because you can't just pick up everybody's secondhand things. But definitely there are pieces where I would agree around, hey, this is how, you know, I'm not going to spend $1,000 on a brand new chair, you know, but I will go and get this other chair reupholstered, and now I'm upcycling. And it's so interesting to see terms like upcycling as a terminology that people use as like, hey, this is what we're doing and it's chic now, in comparison to what we were raised to do, and also to see as a skill set. So when I think about someone who can fix anything, we're also talking about someone who has the skills to change their lives. And oftentimes we take that for granted. If we were able to change something, to fix something as easy as we could, that's a blessing. And we're starting to see, because of consumer culture, they're not even making things of quality the same way. They make it so it intentionally breaks down. So you have to buy a new dryer or a new washer in 5 years, right as soon as that warranty runs out, right? Always how it happens. But I wanted to get in depth a little bit more into some of your other pieces of the question, but it was so much going on. I want to make sure I'm touching on all of it.
No, you are. And actually, you brought up a good point when we talk about conservation. You know, words that, you know, it's so funny that we have these words that we didn't have back then: upcycling, free cycle, all of those things that we didn't know. It was just, as Alora so, you know, aptly described, we got things that worked fine, that we didn't, you know, where we didn't need new things. And, you know, that was obviously true for me growing up. And then I see true for you growing up. And I, you know, just when we talk about the issues, you know, that people face today around the economic crisis, or the effect of climate change, or what we saw with COVID, I wonder if there's a direct way you can sort of relate this notion around using what you have, instead of getting something you really can't afford, or something that's not as necessary. Like, how would you, if you were talking to a community, for example, or an individual, how would you translate, if you were trying to give that lesson, how would you translate that to them?
It's interesting. You said using what you have versus doing something new. I think a lot of communities already do that. They make ways out of no ways. But like Carrie said, also, some of the things we have in this day and age, they just don't last as long. Some things have been passed down. I mean, we have furniture my grandparents bought like in the 1920s, and we had to finally get rid of some of it. And I was like, we can't get rid of that. I love it. And my sister was like, that thing has been through everything in America. The leg is falling off. We didn't patched it up, sewed it up, prayed over it. We got to let it go. And I think communities, you know, nowadays we just don't have things like that anymore that last forever. I think communities use what they have in a sense of their knowledge of how to stay alive. They pass down that knowledge of, you know, we can make this work, we can make that work. There's always a what they call it, an alley mechanic or a hood mechanic who can fix someone's car. You know, back in the day, my great grandfather, he wasn't actually a plumber, but he knew enough about plumbing so he could go to all the people's homes in the neighborhood who were Black and didn't have a lot of money to call an expensive plumber and do quick and easy jobs for them that actually worked out well. So we do use that knowledge of using what you have, but we could definitely, in a lot of communities, do more of just not just the knowledge part, but of realizing the resources we have, whether it is a plot of land to grow some things on, whether it is, you know, extra space in your house to do something with that, you know, old electronics lying around that could be used. And I think I'm not the best expert in this. I would never I would do my research before I walk into the community and said, here's what you can do to like do everything you can do. But there's definitely more things we can do. And then just really doing a lot of asset mapping. We've learned working with communities at the work I do of like, you know, I don't know everything about this community, but from what I've kind of researched, what you're telling me, you can use this to do this to do that. He can help you do this, she can help you do that. And I think a number of communities already do that, but there's definitely more, there needs to be more, sometimes bit more conversation to learn more about each other, to see what the cross fibers are of saying like, did you know that so-and-so was a lawyer and she could actually help with that? And that back and forth can be used. I hope I hit that right. I know.
You hit it perfectly. I know Carrie's gonna do the same.
Yeah, I definitely agree when it comes to how we support each other in the community. Moving from DC and buying a home is a whole other gambit of like life and being a young homeowner. And also I bought in a fixer-upper. So literally I was like, look, I've watched gentrification my entire life. And I want to be able to find somewhere that I can afford that I know is also somewhere I want to be, and that's growing. And so when I came to find my home, I was in West Baltimore and Upton, and a lot of people were like, you're literally buying in the wire. Why are you doing that? Because there's history and there's promise. And I believe in this home that's over 100 years old, right? But more than that, I believe in the community. And one of the things that I love most about my neighborhood is that when I had a hard time and I had an issue, I was able to talk to my neighbors, and there were experts in my neighborhood that helped me to fix what was going on in my house. Mm-hmm. When I had outside contractors and things, they would come, they see a little Black girl, and they're like, honey, I'm about to overcharge you. I'm about to overtax you. And I think about that so much symbolically about when we think about the science of climate change, when we think about the policies of climate change. Sometimes it helps to have some folk that look like you and that come from where you're at that are going to be able to work with you and not mess you over. Because everybody has their own, you know, reasons and interests for why they do something. And for my neighborhood, the reasons and interests is for us together. If my house looks good, then your house looks good. If I'm okay, then you're okay. And that is such a beautiful thing that resonates with me because it is also a skill share, as you mentioned. Now, I am personally working on making sure that I'm not holding on to every little bit in nook and cranny. I'm like, I want that. I've had elders that passed away, and I'm like, wait, but this has so many memories. But really, that's another reason why I appreciate this project, because I have to also archive not just the physical pieces, but also the history, the legacy, the mental pieces that I've been able to gain from folks.
Right. That's right. You guys made me think, oh my goodness, when right now I have my mom is with me up here in Maryland, but when I went home, I was just in town for a day. And she asked me to get the water hose out of the back. And I went back there, and I don't know what I did, but let's just say the faucet came out of the wall. And by the wall, I mean the brick. Mm-hmm. And I was just water gushing out, and I'm freaking out. And of course, my first thought is, we need to get a plumber because there's water gushing out of the thing. So I called the water department. Yeah, we don't do repairs. And so I'm running the house. Mama, I broke the thing. We have to call the plumber, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, wait a minute. And she called the neighbor across the street. The person who's living there, the actual neighbor's passed away, but another neighbor's son is living there. And he called some people who used to live there, the family members in Atlanta, who then called someone else who lives down the street, who wasn't home, but left a message. I mean, the whole neighborhood pitched in. It was hilarious because I was like, oh my God, and, well, he has a tool that you need to turn off the water on the street level. And all of this, instead of me finding a plumber, and I said, because I told her, I'll pay for it, let's get a plumber. We didn't need to do that because just as you both described and defined, people have those skills. And we utilize that. And that, and he wouldn't, he refused to take any money because he says, that's what neighbors do. We look out for each other. And by the time he got there, he told me he left another job when he got the phone calls. I had a friend of mine on the phone, and he was in Mississippi, and I was showing him the water shutoff thing, and he was literally telling me on the phone how to shut it off with pliers. And you see, everybody just pitched in, and that's what we used to do, and that's part of community, right? And part of that culture, the culture of working together. And I think, when we do that, you guys made me think about the fact that I have my grandmother's sofa in here, and I had it reupholstered some years ago. I would love to get rid of it because it takes up a space that I could use. This is just not that big a piece of property, but I love it. But I can't get rid of it because, as Carrie says, it has history, right? I mean, we used to sit on it at my grandmama's house. So, when we talk about things like, even the part of the racial awakening that people started talking a lot about things that happened before, like what happened in Tulsa, right? And how Black Wall Street and all of that. And even with that, it was what we needed to do to survive, right? And thrive, in the words of Mustafa Ali, right? We went from surviving to thriving. We took what we had. I think the message I'm hearing from both of you, we took what we had and made what we needed. And it was quality, right? And it was community, and it was working together. So, I appreciate that message, those messages that, we're talking about conserving things as a part of, not just, I guess, moving on something because you wanted, even though it may cost $1,000. There was a woman, I went to a store a little while ago, and she was like, oh, you should come and get your eyebrows done. It's just $325. And that was my face. I was like, just like, what is this word, just? Because I'm thinking, that there are, other ways we could use our money, right? I mean, when we talk about the economic crisis, I think one of the issues, my mom said to me, I have to keep going back to her, this was a couple months ago. She said, well, your brother said that electricity is the cheapest commodity that we have. That's our cheapest bill. And then I had to, of course, talk about communities that use the majority of their check to pay those bills, and how some people don't have an option. We didn't have it growing up. We didn't have a dryer for a long time. It was, whose turn is it to go hang the clothes outside? And now I miss that, right? Because the sun would bleach the whites, and it was solar energy, solar power to dry the clothes and all of that. So, that brings us back. So, are there any things that, like, for me, what resonates in my head is when I go to other people's homes, particularly my family's home, and I have one cousin who they just leave their lights on in every room. And for me growing up, that was a big lesson. It was, hey, I think the message was, we don't have champagne money. So you can't walk around and leave the lights on when you're going to another room, or leave the television on. Are there any things like that that stand out for you?
Oh, definitely. I definitely was of the vein. Growing up in my granddad's house, we did not have a washer and dry machine. So, we'd have to lug everything to the laundromat. And now when I see things that are like, it's eco-friendly, I'm like, oh yeah, it was for real. Because I used to just be in there playing arcade games and,
Right.
and try to, but I think about that now in the sense of, these are things I don't struggle with as an adult because I've done them my whole life. But I also know that there are certain things where, we talk about the lights, or we talk about even growing food. So some of the pictures, when I look back, there's a lot of pictures of my grandfather's garden growing up, and people look at gardening as like an activity that lots of people want to do, and it's chic now.
Yeah.
But we just garden. One, he might have really loved gardening, which he did. He was a country boy, but also because I never tried collard greens from the grocery store until I got to be an adult. I didn't know that you even could buy them at the grocery store. And there were little things like that that fed us through the summer, like eating a million squash, a million zucchini. If I never have to see a zucchini in my life, I'd be okay. But these are things that were instilled in me throughout growing up, that are now thought of as a big abundant thing. But oftentimes in that same vein, there are things that we saw that we took for granted and we would turn our nose up at. Like, as Alora was mentioning, the friends that are always traveling and got to have the nicest thing. And sometimes that's like our response to having grown up in times where we couldn't have everything.
Right.
So now we assume that we have to have the biggest house, the brand newest of things. And that doesn't always necessarily equate to better. And also, especially when it comes to infrastructure, that's a big lesson. As I mentioned before with gentrification and growing up in it, is that I also paid a lot of attention to how people built their homes and how they built up these new developments, and they would just throw them up just as quick.
Mhm.
And to me, that also taught me a lot about taking time and not just having to rush to meet a demand, but really taking the time to put in, as they mentioned, design excellence, to be able to make sure that is embedded. And I think that's also important when we think about movement building. We don't have to move as fast as everyone else who wants to get the biggest numbers, wants to have the biggest show, because that doesn't necessarily create a sturdy foundation. We
Right.
want to have some time to build in that design excellence, and also maybe even do some of that nice Victorian designs. Like, let's get real creative and build something real nice that can last a long time.
Very good points. I want to say something so bad, but I can't wait to hear what Laura has to say. But I'm making a note because I want to talk a little bit more about that.
I'll say both my grandparents were born in the 30s, during the Depression. So, there wasn't a lot to go around to begin with. My grandfather is one of 8. He never let us forget that. So they were a family that literally, it was, things stretched. You had a bowl of porridge or a big thing of potatoes or a big thing of whatever, because it had to stretch to feed everybody, and then some. Even though my grandmother was an only child, growing up in the South, it still was very much, things had to stretch. It didn't matter. And so growing up, we always had food, plenty of food, cookies, candies, cakes. But my grandfather, if they were doing 10 for 10 or buy one, get one, we had it. We may not have wanted it. It may have been something that was that good. But if they were doing 20-cent cans of sardines, we had about 30 cans of sardines. It may not be what you wanted to eat, but it was food to eat. And so, I always remember that. My grandfather was also a very avid gardener. And so we always had string beans, bell peppers, carrots. He did collard greens sometimes. Just tons of vegetables coming in, tomatoes. So we usually had vegetables from the summer and pretty much into the fall. And then we have family in Kentucky that would actually they would preserve things. So he would send them stuff, and they would send us back jars of canned or preserved whatever they grew in their own gardens. And so that's what we ate growing up. I mean, we ate out every now and then, but it was more so, like gardening. It was things preserved in the house. Turning lights off. Yes. I remember our air conditioning broke, and my grandfather went and bought a bunch of box fans from Montgomery Ward, and every room had a fan in it, and the air was not coming back on. And you learn how to open the windows or sit down and be quiet, because if you're too hot, you should go be quiet somewhere or go get part of the breeze, And so just things like that. I remember he and my grandmother especially doing, because we had to save money. I was like, well, we have money, we have a nice house, like what's the big deal? But they were very much rainy day people, where we may have it now, but we might need it later on. And they were right. There were several instances where $1,000 had to be spent to fix this, $200 for that. And so it made a lot of sense. And I think definitely, like building off what Carrie said, we are in a point where we see a lot of people springing up with different ideas for movements and different things they want to do in a lot of EJ and CJ communities, and they're not really building on this sturdy foundation. They're just kind of, I don't want to even say throwing things together. They have great ideas and great concepts, but everyone has a great idea. Everybody wants to make a poster. They want to get on Twitter, and we're meeting up. We're not doing this anymore. But a lot of folks don't want to do the backbreaking work of, really not even just getting to know communities and organizing, but, the paperwork that comes behind it, the admin work, the sitting down and strategizing, listen to pros and the cons versus just the pros of how we can make this beautiful. And we've seen a lot of wonderful people, wonderful young and older, all people together. We're going to march, we're making a statement, we're upset, we're doing this. And then, but, if this was like maybe a year or 3 years ago, if I could Google some of that stuff now, I wouldn't hear anything about it. And I think we're getting away from that, but we still are in some cases where you have folk who are doing the smart thing of trying to capitalize on the momentum of things happening, but aren't thinking about the long-term longevity programs, and aren't really thinking too about, what happens to a community after you leave. You're here now with cameras, lights, and everything else, but who's here when you leave? Yeah, you got someone to fund them $50,000, but who's here when the $50,000 runs out? Are you come back to help them get another $50,000, or are you just, it's now on your thing, we help fund them? Who's here when people leave? And I think we've got to be better about, sometimes everything doesn't need a big production or show. Sometimes it's better to just keep it very simple, keep it easy, build a foundation from there, and make concrete and really strong partnerships and relationships. And I definitely see that, how we are no longer being that preservation stage of, we're not here to show up to Cancer Alley and make a movement. We're here to start building, preserving, passing things down, getting things moving. We may not make a big splash in the next 10 months as much as we want to, but we've at least changed 2 or 3 lives. We've been here since 95. We're going to be here until 2055 versus folk dropping in for 2010, and then by 2011, they don't work there anymore. They don't talk to anybody anymore.
I think that part is key and critical, because that's a conversation that should be had. And I know that people have been bringing it up to the funders, how movements are created based off of the funding allocated. And oftentimes we have these campaigns, and that's something that's hot right now. So the Green New Deal might have been hot at that moment, so we're going to put a lot of funding into this. But what happens when it dries out, And oftentimes when we're thinking about movements, funders do not think on that long-term scale or level of qualitative, really building out quality programming. They're thinking about how much can get done as quickly as possible. And oftentimes it's not on a calendar. Right. And it's not on a calendar that makes any sense to real people. Maybe it's on a congressional calendar, maybe it's on a fiscal calendar, but it's not on a community calendar.
Right.
And that is the hardest part. And that's what breaks down trust. So when I think about this idea of being able to have champagne, champagne taste on beer money is like, well, how many people can we feed? How many people can we have at this party if we buy, MGD versus buying, Cristal? It might just be a party of 2 or 3 of us if we get this bottle of Cristal. But we could, we could party with the whole block. And oftentimes that is the biggest frustration to me, is that people will build out their movements based off of that. And then that timeline of saying, hey, I have to meet these deliverables or I won't get funded.
Yeah.
And then you start changing the dynamic. And so I know that there are always different people that want to watch these webinars and who may be inspired by them. But I would definitely say that as we're building this out and we're thinking about how we build stronger movements, that we think about the real people, and the real people do not live, breathe, and struggle through environmental injustice on a fiscal calendar. It happens every single day, and we need real funding and real support that balances out those conversations. Yeah,
exactly right. One of the things you guys touched on, the message I got from both of you around culture is that you have been doing these things all your life, eating homegrown. My grandfather also grew vegetables, and that was our first, for a lot of us, only exposure to things we can't afford in the store. Even with my mom, I get my vegetables now. Laura knows I have some of them I grow here, and I try to grow little hydroponics, but I dug out the area in front of behind my bushes in my townhouse, and I put some squash out there, and sorry, Carrie, some zucchini, and thought about some watermelon, because my granddad used to grow watermelon, and some green beans, because we all got to have green beans. And then in the garage, I have another setup with peppers, and my mom is like, we didn't see all of this growing up, and because nobody did hydroponics, right? We put it in the soil. We had yard, we had acreage back then that of course was taken in a lot of instances. But I think about when people come to communities, or not necessarily just communities, or there's some big effort and people want it to be, as you say, Carrie, I'm gonna ad lib a little bit, splashy, this big thing. And or even if you offer a community that's really having a hard time, some funding to upfront to do something, then what are you going to do over time? What are you going to do to help them be resilient, right? This is just to, we have to think beyond the moment. And I think that's kind of what this champagne tastes, when we think about it, when we break it down, instead of having the champagne or having some big effort that looks good on paper or looks good in the newspaper and then going away, right? Like Laura said, and then I don't see you, we check again a couple years later and there's nothing there. Think about the impact you're going to have over time, particularly when we talk about things like the issues that we saw with COVID around, food insecurity, a big one. That's only getting worse, right, with climate change. So what are you going to do long term? And, so I'm a strong proponent of community gardens, right? I was actually supposed to start my class to be a master gardener. I missed the deadline by 1 day. So I'm going to wait till hopefully they'll have a winter series. But, one of the things that the master gardener does is work with communities to establish community garden. How impactful is that? Of course, I'm going to want one of the plots, because this growing in the bushes isn't going to last long, because somebody's going to find out. But I just think that when we talk about, we need to, what we need is for you guys, this lesson that I'm hearing, and the people who are listening, participating in the webinars are hearing, is we need to understand as a people, and I mean all people, understand that big isn't always better, right? And that using rational thought and what is this going to look like over time, and as Alora says, yeah, the big trip, and then you're back, and then what? The only thing you have is pictures and an empty bank balance or whatever, where instead you can show property, a house, or investments. And Carrie, I think you hit it on the head. I'm looking at my neighborhood. They're literally throwing up apartments. And I think about how things looked in the past, and they were so sturdy, and the houses still remain today. And I was driving with my mom in DC, and she goes, "This is history. Look how these homes are made, and how long they've been here." Because she was like, "This is an old neighborhood. You can tell because these homes are sturdy. I wonder how long these people have lived here." And I was like, it's not necessarily the people as much as it is where they are, the structure, the infrastructure. And then when I was thinking, my mom likes to reminisce. We were driving Monday. She goes, "We saw a fruit tree somewhere." She goes, "Oh, we used to have those in our yard." And a lot of us did. We didn't think anything of it. Pear trees, fig trees, pecan trees. Now we have an orange tree. My mom does. We can't, it's so high we can't cut anything down, but all of that sustained us. My mom would make preserves with her figs, and we'd go blackberry picking. Can't do that now because of pesticides, right? So culture is so important. When it seems like there's such a strong connection between culture and conservation, using what we have the way we were raised to save things today. So, to do things economically, to do things that make sense and reasonable. So I guess I said that was a big lesson, but I guess I'm kind of wondering if you had one lesson, one cautionary warning, or one piece of valuable information related to, if you had to sort of impart this information to a group of people, and you start with champagne taste and beer money, what would be the ultimate lesson that you would want them to know? Like one takeaway, because people usually remember one thing from an in-person meeting, and I don't know how many things from a Zoom meeting because we're on them all the time. So what's the one important lesson from this that you would give?
I would say be thankful for what you got. I definitely think we take for granted what we don't recognize is amazing, so take a closer look, be thankful, see where you can utilize something differently in a way that and if you don't value it, ask yourself who might value it more than you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That you made me think of your word upcycle. Use it and pass it on. My mother has a sofa. I keep saying, it's time to get rid of it. Oh, but it's when you guys grew up there and it's been covered and recovered. And she says, I say, and now it's time for somebody else to create memories on it, please. So because it is, we don't throw things away. We pass them on to somebody else who needs them. So that's a very good point. Thank you, Carrie. Alora.
I would say learn from the past, but also look and think about look to and think about the future. We don't want to forget the lessons being taught to us, not just by like grandparents and parents, but people you meet in the neighborhood, people you meet at church. There's some people in my church who have done well, and I've always been like, I'm gonna come work for you and make big money, and they're like, listen, I had to do a lot to get big money. It didn't come overnight. You got to be ready to sacrifice, to scrape, to hustle hard. And I mean, they tell one of my favorite trustee Slade, he'll tell anybody real quick. He'll say, me and my wife, we both of us happen to get lucky and get to do different opportunities to build our business, but it doesn't come overnight. And so learning from people like that who have to teach you about things don't come easy. We had to do this in the past. Learning from some of our elders who, especially like, I guess some of our grandparents' age, or maybe great grandparents, depending on how young you are, a lot of them lived through Jim Crow, civil rights movement, and they'll tell you, it's people who were master's degrees, highly educated, couldn't get a job anywhere because they were Black, and they had to just do what they could to feed their family. So learning from the past and looking towards the future in a sense of, you have it now, but you might need it 10 months from now. You might need it 10 years from now. And so thinking about, budgeting, and learning how to say, of course saying no, but just learning how to say, this will work now, but, we have to have something ready for 10 or 20 years from now. You have people who are just like, they make, $80,000-$90,000 a year. They don't have any money in their 401k. So I'm like, are you going to work for the rest of your life? I'll put some money in later. You're 35. Later is coming up quicker than you know. And so, I mean, these are folk who are actually working, they're making money. And I can only imagine if folk, who sadly or maybe aren't making as much every year, who may not have the opportunity to put it away. But if those of us who do have an opportunity to think about the future when it comes to your spending and things, but also thinking about it when it comes to your right with our planet and conservation. And I think a lot of people who are not our planet conservation, just in general with other subjects too, they're thinking about now, but they're not thinking about, what you're doing, the movement now is sustainable for 10 years. Is it something that we could come back to? Have we learned from the past and saying, we did this model before and it didn't work. We shouldn't do this model again. We did this model before and it did work. Maybe we should revamp it and bring it back again. People enjoyed that and they were receptive to it. And I think a lot of times within our personal finances, but also within like organizational movement building, we're not looking back. We're saying, well, that's the old, we're into the new now. And then we're starting something new and just a big old mess. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And I think that's caused by a number of people who were just jumping in the movement and doing a number of different things. But I encourage people to do that. I mean, I'm grateful that people like you, Dr. Hollis, and Mustafa and Vernice and Leslie and so many others, Jackie, are always telling me about different things that happened in the past and some things you used to do and like stuff like that. And most people will say, well, that's what they used to do. Why do they care now? And it's like, well, it was a used to do thing, but if we did it now in a community, it'll still work. We just have to revamp it. And I think sometimes some of the people, young and old, who are in this movement are very much, I've got a great idea. I know how to work Twitter. I can make a graphic, and they're ready to just go forward without thinking about the longevity future. Because a lot of these communities that we're working with we're trying to help, we're a great help for the first 6 months, but Lord willing, Ms. Jenkins is going to need your help in 2028 with the issues that are happening there. We're trying to shut down fossil fuel industries, but we're not going to be able to shut all those sadly fossil fuel plants throughout the South until 2050, 2060. And so it's great to think about now the splash you're making, but, looking towards the future of like, okay, how do we continue to go and help every year, same time every year, to be a part of this movement and to get these things done. And so, like I said, think about the past, but also look towards the future as well, because you've got to be more forward thinking versus just 6 months out. It's got to be 20 years out for what some of these movements we're trying to build and do. Thank you.
And I get, 3 things I immediately picked up from what you said, you probably didn't even realize. One was just the art of budgeting. A lot of people don't know how to do it, right? Even if, I think my mom could budget to the nickel, to the penny, and so could my grandparents, because you had no choice. And I think a lot of people are in that same situation today. And once we start making money, like, I'm when I started out after college, I made $10,000. I thought I was like, ooh, no, I was living at home, because I was working around the corner, and I what is that thing? More money, more problems. And I said it politely. I meant more money, more problems, right? But that's one thing, was the need for lessons. And we learned this growing up. My mom used to have me write checks for her and balance the checkbook, send me to the store. And I'm not saying we all should return the checkbooks, but I'm just saying as part of our culture, we were taught those things. We were taught that champagne isn't always best. Another thing is traditional, and you both touched on this, traditional ecological knowledge, right? The history, the importance of what's worked and what has worked in the past, and how important that history is for infrastructure, for knowledge, for food, for just so many different things. And then I thought about something else. And this sort of touched for me on this notion of champagne taste and beer money is another saying we've heard: the grass is greener. People think the grass is greener on the other side, right? We need to operate from a position of that grass is brown. And so let's not even go there. Let's work with what we have and make it better. Let's work on this, on this side of the fence. Let's work in our community. Let's work to make this planet better. That's why personally, I'm always concerned about people wanting to take a ride to the moon and do all this. Like, why are we planning to leave instead of fixing where we are? Instead of addressing issues here, we're going to abandon it. That's like when you're farming and you're not getting the crop you wanted, so you just leave it and let it grow wild. No, you figure out how to cultivate it or what you need to add or things like that. So those are the messages that I receive, and you guys have been such a source of great information today that I am so happy that you decided to join us. And so I wanted to thank you for contributing your stories to this project and for joining us today as we continue our series, Picking Greens and Being Greens, Black Mamas and Others, and Culture, Conservation, and Community. And for our listeners, thank you all so much. And I hope that, if you have any questions or something you want to follow up on, that you do that with Alora Carter or Carrie Fulton. So thank you both so much on behalf of the Chisholm Legacy Project, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this wonderful episode of Picking Greens and Being Green. I've had so many, I've traveled down memory lane so many times since we recorded that session, even today. So, and someone put in the chat something that they remembered. And please join us for our next episodes. We do have 4 more segments. Food is Love, Living in Harmony with Mother Earth, It Takes a Village, which is going to be our last one, and Lessons Become Traditions. And so these are not necessarily in the order of their appearance. The blog that accompanies this segment will be live in the next few days, as will a link to this video. So please encourage others to watch it. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Bye-bye.